Hello everyone, hope you're doing well. Today in War Thunder we're having a look at another user-created model, and the model itself is the Supermarine Swift F1. It's also made by Snozzeltoff, the same person behind the Vulcan, and of course there will be a link in the description for you to have a look for yourself. After these user-created models are finished, I will be doing a video on how to install them from your end if you are struggling with them. So just be a little bit patient on that because we have a few more to get through that still work to this day, which is wonderful to see. So, in this video we're going to be talking about the Swift and also, of course, its place in War Thunder if it has one or if it does not. So the first thing to understand is the Vickers Supermarine. I always say submarine, and I apologize for that, but I do mean Supermarine Swift. It was a single-seat jet fighter and was a development that followed on from the Supermarine 510, 528, and 535, where the 535 was pretty much just a pre-production Swift. The 510 was based on a straight-wing attacker, which we have in game, which first flew in 1948, whilst the 528 was a further modified aircraft and saw the change from the much hated tail wheel undercarriage to a nose wheel configuration, something that a lot of aircraft by the time, especially jets, had sorted out, but, you know, there was a few companies out there which weren't exactly as fast as others when changing, you know, the configuration of the wheels. It also featured a longer, more pointed nose, kinked wing leading edges, and a large fuselage. And in this form it was redesignated the 535 and flew for the first time on the 23rd of August 1950. So this is a 1950s aircraft. I remember back in the day, or at least, I should say the pre-production Swift was a 1950s aircraft. I remember back in the day, a very long time ago now, that War Thunder used to have like a year limit on planes. This was even before ground vehicles were added into the game. Nowadays we have, you know, helicopters from 2010 and tanks from the 1990s, but yeah, there are still some aircraft that we don't see in the game, which I'm sure next year will start, you know, coming to it. So by this time in 1950, the Air Ministry were becoming increasingly anxious over the Hawker Hunter program, and began to turn to Supermarine as the tensions grew in Korea and the need for the quickest possible production of a usable fighter aircraft. So two production prototypes were built. These were the WJ-960 and the WJ-965, and they were then redesignated the Type 541. And the first of these flew on the 1st of August 1951, so about a year after the first pre-production Swift was about. So, compared with the Type 535, which is the first pre-production, as we talked about, the main change in the design was the use of the axial flow Rolls-Royce Avon in place of the centrifugal flow Neen engine. So it was using a very similar engine to the machine that we looked at yesterday. So this change was accompanied by a significant increase in internal fuel capacity, and the WJ-965 introduced a lengthened intakes, a modified forward fuselage, and an enlarged dorsal fin, which setting the final production configuration. So by this point, you know, we're talking about maybe 5 or 6 different prototypes down the line. We have finally reached the point where they are happy with a production design of the Swift. So the first of 18 production Swift F1s flew on the 25th of August 1952. So if we look at actual, you know, I suppose you would call it time of production, you know, how long it takes from a prototype to actually get to a proper produced and functioning model, this is actually pretty quick. You know, you're only talking about a couple of years here, where some aircraft were kind of in the limbo for way longer than this. And obviously the first 18 being the Swift F1, which is the one that we have modelled in-game by Snozzeltoff. The Swift F2, there were 16 of these built, and they increased the cannon armament from 2 to 4 30mm Radeon guns. Radeon guns being pretty much the common choice for a lot of these British jets, and the inboard leading edge of the wing received increased sweep to allow extra wing fuel to be carried, making up for volume displaced by the additional fuselage-mounted cannon. The Swift F3, so the third in the production series, there was 25 of these built, and it featured increased engine thrust using the afterburning Avon RA7R, although it was never destined for RAF use, rather than being utilized as an instructional aircraft. So you're talking about basically a trainer aircraft in this sense. The first Swift variant to be produced in any significant numbers, though, was the Swift F4. It introduced a variable incidence tailplane to overcome the pitch-up problem which was experienced on the F3. So the prototype F4 set a new world speed record of 737.7 miles per hour. This was over Libya on the 25th of September 1953. The previous record was 727 miles per hour, which was set by Neville Duke 3 weeks earlier in the Hawker Hunter F3. So the British were definitely, competing for the world speed record, which is always wonderful to see. A little bit of a national pride there on those days. It was a short-lived accolade, though, as the record was pushed even further to 753 miles per hour by an American Douglas Sky Raider just a few days later. So the Swift only held it for a few days, but it's still something. The next Swift variant that was created, this was the Type 549 Swift FR5. There was 58 of these built, and they had reconnaissance cameras installed in the extended nose. So this would be the reconnaissance version of it, and the final production mark was the F7. 14 of these were built, and the Swift F7 was the first RAF fighter to be armed with air-to-air guided missiles. And this is where we get into a few issues. Obviously, in War Thunder right now, we don't have anything which has air-to-air missiles on it when it comes to jets. So if we wanted to stay away from that idea, we would have to add in the earlier versions and the F7, and I think that, that would be completely fine to do. But it is just something, you have to take into account. A lot of these British jets around this time were starting to, be armed with stuff like air-to-air guided missiles, which is, the step that a lot of people see in War Thunder that Rank 6 is going to bring. The production of the F7, it comprised of two 541 prototypes and 193 production aircraft, and a number of production contracts were cancelled, and the Swift encountered a number of development and operational problems in comparison with its contemporary, the Hawker Hunter. One of the things that a lot of these British jets ran into was issues when it came to those twofold issues. So the first one was a big leap in actual technology. We saw this yesterday with the jets that we were looking at. So you had a massive leap in technology, which meant that a lot of the people weren't exactly familiar with it, and on top of this, you also had the fact that because you had such a leap in technology, that also came with a lot of problems when it came to the actual functioning of said technology. So the way I like to see it is in the 50s, the British had quite an ironing out period when it came to a lot of the jet technology that they were the pioneers of in the 1940s, and eventually they ironed them out, but there was a few aircraft there which had quite a few issues going forward. So, in February 1954, when 56th Squadron at RAF Bentwaters received their first Supermarine Swifts, although initially there were a number of restrictions on speeds, operating ceiling, and gun firing. The Swift F2s replaced the F1s in August of the same year, but a number of accidents occurred before the aircraft was grounded. So, despite assurances from the engineers and designers at Supermarine, the RAF completely lost confidence, and the order was given to withdraw the Swift from service forthwith. So the Swift FR5 performed extremely well in a low-level reconnaissance role, and in 1957 it won the NATO Royal Flush Reconnaissance Competition. But by the time of the production of the last variants, many, if not all, of the significant problems had been solved, but by then the Hawker Hunter was performing extremely well and fulfilling the needs and requirements of both the RAF and many other countries around the world. So it wasn't the fact that the Swift aircraft was not good enough. It was definitely good enough. Compared to its contemporaries, such as the Hunter, a lot of people would actually say the Swift was a better aircraft on its day. But of course, just like a lot of aircraft, it isn't just a game of who has the completely maximum better performance. It's also who can turn up on the day with that performance, and that is where the Swift struggled with its early variants. And by the time the later variants came out, fixed everything, well, the RAF has to at some point be able to set up the future for themselves. So they have to basically say to themselves, right, do we wait for this product, or do we go with another product that we know is going to be efficient for us and is going to also get the job done? So is there any point in the Swift program if we're already dedicated to this product? And unfortunately, at the end of the day, it turns into a big no. Now, does that mean that the Swift does not have a place in War Thunder? Well, of course it has a place in War Thunder. A lot of people, when you look at these British aircraft, have argued that they could be added into the game today. And I think, to be honest, when we look at certain ones, I think the answer is yes, they probably could. But the problem I have with the Supermarine Swift is I would like to see some of its contemporaries from other nations added at the same time, just so we kind of get a little bit of balancing out of the speed. It is quite a difference in speed, even though a lot of people don't think it is. Even that slight little edge at top tier can make a big difference, and also maneuverability is going to be a lot different as well. But for me, it's got DEFAs, it's got speed, it looks wonderful, just like a lot of these British jets do. It has access to technology such as air-to-air missiles, which I'm sure soon in the game will come in a large way. I mean, it only makes sense. So, with that said, yes, I would like to see it in the game. It is very nice to know that Britain has a bunch of great jets that you could add to the game in Rank 6, and so do other nations, at least most of them in game. It may be worth doing a chat about, other nations and what they could bring to what we would class as the Rank 6 era of jets. Anyway, I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time.